The Mariners head down to Texas for the final road trip of the year. We'll get you set for that, plus go over a couple of off-season items that are on our minds. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, September 20th, 2024. This is Ted Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Mariners are back at it tonight against the Rangers, still trying to win games and hoping they can get some help across the league. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about some positives we're taking into the offseason from what we've seen as of late, and also discuss perhaps the biggest question the Mariners are faced with this offseason. What the hell are they going to do at third base? But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, so you have until Sunday, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So it seems that the baseball gods have refused the olive branch that I extended on last night's show. The Angels wound up losing to the Astros 3-1. So the Mariners are still 5 back in the AL West heading into this weekend. Now there's still an outside shot here that if the Mariners can take care of business down in Arlington and the Astros lose 2-3, that the Mariners can go into that series with the Astros with a chance to take control of the AL West by the end of that series. It's not a likely shot, but there is an outside shot. So, final road trip of the year. We are winding down to the end of the season, Colby. How you feeling?
Roughly where I was about 10 days ago, the realization that this thing's over, you toasted yourself, like, You dug yourself this hole, and so sitting here and hoping that everybody else is going to help you out is absurd. And oh, by the way, they've gotten plenty of help. They really have over the last month. Even when things were bleak, they got plenty of help. The Minnesota Twins were a disaster this month, and unfortunately, yeah, you ran off a nice little run there at the beginning of the month, but you really haven't taken advantage of the Twins falling flat on their face, and you've done it because you found a way to essentially, snap. You found a way to lose games that you have no business losing. Like, it's not like, oh, we just ran into this really tough pitcher. Oh, you played really poor situational baseball in this month. And it's a bummer, but it's the reality. And it's why you can't afford to put yourself in a position where you need things to go right, because typically every year there's maybe one team that catches fire at the right time and they, get into the playoffs, and that's how they get in. And that's not every single year. So, to expect there to be multiple teams to do that, it's just not realistic. And you haven't played well enough to earn that, right? Like at a certain point, we can sit here and talk about, well, yeah, this and that and that. This team was 13 games over 500. If they had just played 500 ball from June until today, they'd still be in first place. So at the end of the day, like, team has nobody to blame but themselves. You can't get annoyed that, the Angels aren't helping us, or, oh, well, no, you didn't help yourself. So you're right where you deserve to be. Over the course of 162 games, that's kind of the beauty of the baseball season. It'll tell you who you are. And what we know about this Mariners team, as we're getting ready to wrap up this season, is that they're about a 500 team. They're pretty mediocre. I came to that realization a couple weeks ago, and I'm standing by it. We'll see. Maybe a miracle happens, and maybe we're singing a different tune next week. But basically, the way it is right now, we're just entering a period where you have to win the next 6. Like, I don't see any way that you're going to make the playoffs if you don't sweep these next 2 series. So essentially, you're playing elimination baseball every single night. That sucks. But that's a situation that this group of 26 dudes put themselves in over the course of the last few months. It wasn't a one bad week doom dust type of thing. You were bad for, 3 months, and Now you're trying to scramble. You're trying to do everything you can to keep your head above the water, and it's too late. You already drowned. So, you have one last gasp here. You can try and sweep this 7 games, or sorry, sweep these 6 games, and then see what happens in that final series. But you kind of have to sweep the next 2 series to even be in a position where that last series could mean anything. So, bummer, but it's where I've been for the last few weeks. So I'm right where I was a few weeks ago.
Again, the ideal outcome here is you sweep the Rangers and the Angels take 2 of the next 3 against the Astros, which again very unlikely, but that at least gives you a shot to head into that Astro series where if you sweep them, all right, now you're in first place because you have the tiebreaker heading into the final series of the year. And the A's are going to be a tough customer, but also the Astros have to play the Guardians to wrap up the year. So anything can happen over those final 3 games of the year. And so if you're able to get into a spot where, all right, maybe even if you're not in first place heading into that final series, but at least you're 1 game back, there's a shot. Right. So we'll see. But yeah, it all starts tonight. I mean, you got to take care of business. Like, obviously you need outside help, but you can't really worry about that right now. You got to just play your game and win these next 3 against the Rangers, and see what happens once you get to Houston. See what things look like once you get to Houston. So it's going to be George Kirby tonight against Jacob deGrom. Tomorrow it's going to be Emerson Hancock against Max Scherzer. And then Sunday, it'll be Brian Wu against Andrew Heaney. So any thoughts on any of those pitching matchups?
Better score runs, particularly the Hancock start.
And
it's again, it's a real bummer. And had you just won the game you should have won against the Yankees the other night, then the Hancock start might be a little bonus. You'd be 4 games back today, and we'd be talking about 1 game back of the wild card. And it's like, hey, you have to start Hancock at least one more time, but it might be okay. Like, you might be able to drop that game, and unfortunately you can't. So now you need Hancock to go out there and throw the ball well. You have no off days till Thursday. So next Thursday. So the bullpen, management is going to be pretty important here. And unfortunately, none of the starters in the Yankees series really did a lot to help you out there. I mean, Miller went 6, and that was the most. So it's going to be a rough couple days, but you need Kirby, you need somebody to step up and go 7 strong one of these nights and allow you to kind of reset the bullpen. And hey, what else would be great? If you could have a 5 or 6 run lead in this first game here, so that you can go out there and you can throw, Diaz and Bizzardo out there and give Munoz, give Snyder, give Taylor a day before you start this gauntlet. So, we'll see what it is, but they have to score runs. I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. They need to score runs. They're in a good hitting environment. They're facing, some good arms, but arms that are, coming off the IL, and they're fresh off the IL, and they're not likely to go deep in these games. And so you can attack that Texas bullpen. You got to score runs early. You got to put pressure on these guys, get the starters out of it, and then get to the bullpen as soon as you can. And on the flip side, somebody in this rotation needs to go 7 innings in this series. And you just can't, even if it's crunch time, you can't roll out Andres Munoz 5 days in a row, so at some point you're going to have to try and find a 4 or 5 win victory. Score as many runs as you possibly can. Actually have a good game plan against these pitchers. Yes, it's Scherzer and deGrom, fine, whatever, but this is 2024 Scherzer and deGrom. Like, it's not prime Scherzer and deGrom, and they're both going to be working on some kind of pitch count or some kind of innings limit. So get to these guys early, get their pitch count up, get to the bullpen, feast on that bullpen, avoid the guys in the back if at all possible. And, you just have to play clean baseball. You cannot make mistakes.
Yeah. So we're in a weird spot right now as content creators covering this team on a day-to-day basis, because again, there is that outside shot that they can make the playoffs still, but it does feel on most days like off-season talk is the more interesting conversation to have. So our minds are kind of in 2 separate places at once, especially over the last few weeks. And so we're going to get into some of that off-season discussion Yesterday, I mentioned one positive that I'm taking into the offseason from what we've seen as of late. I want to get into some others potentially here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Again, that is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. You can catch all the action between the Mariners and the Rangers tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So yesterday, I mentioned that Troy Taylor is a big positive that I'm going to take into this offseason. What we've seen out of him, obviously what his development has meant for this bullpen, which has dealt with several injuries, big time injuries to Gregory Santos, Matt Brash, and obviously a couple of disappointments from guys that you were hoping to get more out of, like Ryan Stanek and Gabe Spire, etc. So I wanted to get into some more of those, potential positives that we're taking into the offseason from what we've seen as of late from this team. So Colby, do you have any?
Yeah, obviously, Luke Raley has been a huge, boon to this team. Not only this particular team, but also he kind of gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to attack this offseason, because I think going into next year, you feel pretty good about this guy producing at some level. Like you're maybe he's not an all-star, but maybe he is, a 120 WRC plus guy. I feel like we're pretty comfortable that this guy's going to be an above average.
He's done it for 2 seasons now.
Right. And you could split it up any way you want, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's more like a season and a half, but whatever.
Yakety yak, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
He's proven he can hit at T-Mobile Park. We know he can hit righties. He runs well. He bunts, hits home runs. Like,
we're not doing that again today.
I know. Yeah. He strikes out. Fine. Whatever. Okay. Fine. You can have guys who strike out in your lineup. You just can't have a lineup full of guys who all strike out a ton. So, but what he does is, A, he's not making any money next year. He's still going to be making the league minimum. He's not arbitration eligible yet. But B, because he can play first base and because he can play all 3 outfield spots, what he allows you to do this winter, he allows you just to go get the best hitter you can afford. Like, it's not like, oh, well, we don't really have room in the outfield because we have Robles and Julio and Randy and Raley. It's like, no, Raley can play first base and now you have the DH open, or Robles can find the bench and you can use so if the best bat you can go get is a first baseman, fine. Raley can DH, Raley can play all 3 outfield spots. You can rotate those guys through, not a big deal. If the best bat you can get is a corner outfielder, fine. Not a big deal. Raley can play first base or Robles can DH, and there's a lot of ways you can work it. So the fact that Luke Raley is club controlled. He's going to be making the minimum next year. He is a pretty safe bet to be at least a productive player, not somebody you're looking to, actively replace, actively improve on. And the fact that he has that versatility, that is a big positive heading into this offseason, because it's one less question you need an answer to. Raley is probably going to be in your opening day lineup next year. And it can be in one of, 3 or 4 spots. And that gives you a lot of flexibility as you enter this off season. So that's a big positive development for the 2024 and 2025 Seattle Mariners.
For me, the guy that I immediately think of here with this exercise is Bryce Miller. I think since the All-Star break, especially, we've seen Miller turn into a legitimate dude, like capital D dude in the Mariners rotation. Now, I thought that even beforehand, but I think he's really cemented that status here over the last couple of months. I think you can make a solid argument that he's been the Mariners' best pitcher in their rotation since the All-Star break. He is 6 in ERA since the All-Star break. He is 12th in FIP. He's got one of the lowest walk rates in the league. And what we've seen from his arsenal this year in particular, just as a whole, not even since the All-Star break, just as a whole, we've seen that pitch mix really take a jump. We've seen his secondaries really take a jump, and the splitter is a legitimate offering. We're seeing him, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, we're seeing him turn himself into an actual complete pitcher now. We're starting to see that transformation. I don't think he's completely there yet, but we're starting to see him make that transition into just an all-around, well-rounded pitcher. Sub 200 batting average against 2 of his offerings. 192 batting average against his four-seamer. 154 against the splitter. The splitter is very, very legit. It's basically the same thing we saw from Logan Gilbert last year. It's happened again here with Bryce Miller and his splitter. 154 batting average, like I said, 183 expected batting average as well. Opponents are hitting the ball hard just 34% of the time against that pitch. He's putting away hitters 21.7% of the time on that pitch, and he's getting them to whiff 28.5% of the time on that pitch. That's the highest whiff rate of any of his offerings in his arsenal. So just continuing to hammer away at his secondaries over the course of this offseason is going to be huge. And I think really sky's the limit for Bryce Miller with what we're seeing right now. I mean, we've seen him just flat out dominate, especially against some really good lineups. He had a great start against the Yankees a couple of days ago. He's showing that he can go toe to toe with really anyone and go toe to toe with any lineup on any given night. And we haven't even seen him hit his ceiling, in my opinion. That's very, very exciting. And so as excited as I am about Brian Wu, and I've talked about on this show how Wu is my favorite pitcher to watch right now in the Mariners rotation, but I also kind of feel like Miller's kind of the forgotten man in this rotation right now. And again, I think you can make a strong argument that he's been the Mariners' best pitcher in the rotation, at least over the last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing to keep in mind is that this guy has only been throwing the splitter for about a year. So, I mean, like the odds that pitch keeps getting better, pretty good, pretty high. So, Miller, obviously a big development. Brian Wu, also a big development. The nice thing about Miller is that you feel really good that he's going to post. He's going to make his 30 starts. He's going to go 170, 200 innings. Like, you feel really good about that. And Wu's not quite there yet. But
I would say on that a positive to take into this offseason is that we have seen Wu get deep into games as of late, and he hasn't reported any issues.
Right. So he's found a way to work through that. He's routinely going 7 innings now, or into the 7th now. He's routinely throwing 100 pitches. So that is a positive. But yeah, Miller is definitely somebody you're banking on now. And, hopefully he survives the winter because my thing where I'm at with those 2 arms is that I'm not trading them.
It makes no sense. Because, with the spending habits of ownership, right? You have 2, pre-arb starting pitchers who are mid-rotation quality already in hand. That makes no sense to move off of those guys.
Right. I mean, again, there's always the caveat. It's like, well, what if you can get, their equivalent as a hitter? Like, fine. Like, I guess if you can go get 5 years of Riley Green or Corbin Carroll for one of these guys, like, fine, whatever. Or you can go get superstar like Jose Ramirez for one of these guys, like, fine, I guess, whatever. But
sure.
The whole like, oh, trade him for Lars Nootbaar thing. Like, I really hope we retire that, like that level of player. I hope we retire that this winter because these guys clearly are they're core players. They're not ancillary players. These guys have worked themselves into being part of the core of this team.
And they're just so important to the future roster builds of the team going beyond 2025 again because of how affordable they are right now. So third base, it's a big question mark heading into this offseason. We've talked about it a lot on our Patreon show. We talked about it a little bit here. I believe, what was it, last Friday, when we did that show talking about the offseason and how, they might have to trade Luis Castillo and blah, 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 blah. And we went down the list of free agent third baseman, and it was bare aside from a couple of names. So we've had more time to think about it. We've had more discussions about it, again, on our Patreon show. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel, which, of course, is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, I have something a little different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, that's LOCKEDON, to download America's #1 sportsbook. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch all the action between the Mariners and the Rangers tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So again, we have talked about this a lot on our Patreon show. We talked about it a little bit last week on this show, where we ran down the list of free agent third basemen and found, there aren't many. I believe I saw today that there are only, 17 or 18 qualified third basemen in all of baseball this year. And one of them is Jazz Chisholm, who didn't even start playing there until after the Yankees acquired him. So this isn't just a Mariners exclusive issue. There just aren't a lot of third basemen right now in the league, a lot of quality third basemen. And more specifically, there aren't a lot of third basemen here that actually provide third base quality bats, right? You want power output out of your third baseman. Right now, the Mariners aren't getting that out of Josh Rojas, right? The idea heading into the season was, all right, we're going to sacrifice power at third base, but we're hoping to make that up at a position that typically doesn't produce a lot of power at second base with Jorge Polanco. That hasn't really panned out, of course. And it seems like they might have to do that again this offseason, right, Colby?
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of options out there. There are, like, Alex Bregman's out there, and I know that some publications say that, the Mariners are a top contender for Bregman. They're not. Like, Alex Bregman's not going to be a Seattle Mariner. We can just stop that right now. Obviously, Chapman's off the board now. I don't think Seattle was going to be interested at that price anyways, but he's off the board, so that's no longer an option. So when you really start, looking for third baseman, what you kind of realize is that either Seattle's going to have to trade for one, and again, there's not a lot of them out there, or they're going to have to sign a shortstop or a second baseman and move them to third base, or they're going to have to take Cole Young and convert him to third base, and then obviously, you still need a second baseman at that point, and power is still an issue, blah, blah, blah. So basically, like, what you kind of come to realize is that the Mariners aren't going to have a power hitting third baseman next year. Like, it's very unlikely, unless one happens to pop up, or you take a shot on a guy like a Yohan Moncada, who coming off a big injury, he'll be a free agent. You probably get him pretty cheap. You want to take a shot on a Gleyber Torres bounce back while he's learning a new position. Like, that's a possibility as well.
And does Gleyber want to sign to a situation where he's playing a new position? Right.
In Seattle. A place that is traditionally not a good, rebound spot for a bat. So, you're in a real tight spot here. So honestly, it feels like if you're going to fix third base or improve third base, I should say, you're gonna have to do it via the trade market, and not a lot of options out there. So you look at some of the classic names we've talked about before. Jonathan India is a natural third baseman. Like, he has played second his entire career. He's not very good over there, so moving him to third, maybe you get better defense. But India is like a 15 home run guy. Like, so, and he's been really bad here in the second half. So
that's better than Josh Rojas in terms of power.
And that's the whole thing, right? Is that, you're not going to find like an all-star third baseman. Probably, we could be surprised. You never know. But you need somebody who is at least an everyday bat, kind of regardless of how they do it, to play third base. And then you're just going to have to make up the power from hopefully next year center field. Julio coming back and hitting 30+ home runs, that would help a lot. You're going to make up some of that power at catcher. And then you're going to have to make up some of that power at, DH or first base. So, and the Mariners don't need it. The Mariners hit enough home runs, right? They need to get on base more. They need to hit more doubles, blah, blah, blah. So,
they do need to slug more, though.
They need to slug more, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be home runs.
Right.
If they are, great. And, you'll have Randy Arozarena for an entire season, in theory.
Mm-hmm.
In theory. So that should be, more home runs from
it shouldn't be in theory.
Right. So, but yeah, you kind of start looking around the landscape here for third baseman, and there's not a lot. And so what it seems like is either you're going to go out and you're going to acquire a player who hasn't quite proven that they're, an everyday big leaguer yet. For example, Nolan Gorman, possibility there. You're going to acquire somebody who has some red flags, most likely to their health. For example, Max Muncy could be a possibility there. Or you're going to go acquire a prospect who doesn't really have any big league time, and you're just going to hope that he can kind of, roll into his role here and be a viable big leaguer from day one. Or I guess you can go get a failed prospect. I mean, I don't even want to call it that, but can you go get Noelvi Marte back? The Reds have a lot of infielders. Can you go get Noelvi Marte and see if that works? So yeah, I've been circling looking for third base opportunities. Like Matt McClain would be a fun one. He's missed this entire year with injury. Are the Reds going to trade him? Probably not. Spencer Steer, you want to take a shot there? Probably not. And the one team that I found that might have a couple of options for you at third base. Neither of them perfect, but the Minnesota Twins do have a couple of guys who can play third base who, the Twins have infield depth. And this is what makes the Twins kind of perfect. They have infield depth. They aren't going to add payroll. Really, they didn't do it at the deadline. Reports already out that they're going to have roughly the same payroll as they had next year. So they're going to have to, save some money, or they're going to have to improve their roster with guys who aren't making money. And so they have some infield depth that they can trade. And the two guys that stand out right away are Willie Castro, who has 1 year left to club control. He's going to be making about $6 million next year, $7 million. And also Jose Miranda, who doesn't hit for power, not a very good defender at third base, but hits for a lot of average, gets on base a good amount, makes a lot of contact. So yeah, a couple of guys there for the Twins. And so they might be the team most likely to give the Mariners, who will end up being their starting third baseman on opening day.
Yeah. I mean, is there a shot there where you could trade Miller or Wu for Royce Lewis?
Do you even want to, though?
Do you want to?
Do you trust Royce Lewis to stay healthy? Because I don't.
Yeah, he's already ARB eligible too because he's Super 2. So he's going to start making more money. I don't know.
Right. Do you want to trade Miller or Wu for Brooks Lee, who's got a little bit of major league seasoning but doesn't have success at the big league level yet, but is a very good prospect? Maybe. Can you get the Twins to eat a ton of money on Carlos Correa and get him to waive his no trade clause and have him play shortstop or third base for Seattle? There are. What about?
I might be working on that for our off-season plan.
He's patreon.com/control the zone. But yeah, I mean, even Julian, a guy who had a really good rookie year, didn't have a good year this year. Doesn't hit lefties at all. Strikes out a good amount. But he's got power. He takes a lot of walks. He actually hits for a decent average. He's a pretty good athlete.
He's from Canada.
So Minnesota. Yeah, sure. The Minnesota Twins are a team to watch here. But particularly when I look at what they have in their farm system and what they need to replace from free agents and all that stuff, I kind of look at this and I go it feels like Willie Castro is the guy I kind of, just because he's going to make some money so you can ease some of that payroll restraint on him. And a lot of their young prospects who are close to the big league ready, they are outfielders. So, it seems like they're probably not going to be too interested in any of your outfielders. And really the only one that would make sense for the Twins next year would be Luke Raley, because he's also making league minimum.
Yeah. Castro is really interesting, and you don't have to be beholden to starting him at third base either, because he is a great defender at basically everywhere on the field. Right? He's a super utility through and through. But if you did play him, oh, gross. If you did play him at third base, though, that's another example of you're not going to get a ton of power output from him. So, but you're going to get stolen bases. You're going to get really good defense. You're going to get the ball being put in play a lot. So
above average on base.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of value that Castro brings. I would acquire Castro with the idea that he is going to be my super utility, and then depending on how the rest of the offseason shakes out, maybe he ends up being a third baseman and still plays a little bit, elsewhere over the course of the season.
I can give you one name to watch for the third base thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's never played third base before. He may not be available, and he probably doesn't have the power you typically want from your third baseman either. But we talked about him this summer. Jerry circles back. We don't know for sure that they were all that interested in this guy, but they were very interested in his teammate. We know they were, and they put out an aggressive offer for his teammate. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm talking about Bo Bichette, who has 1 year left of club control for the Blue Jays, has had just a terrible year, lots of injuries.
He just returned from injury and immediately fractured his finger.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Bo Bichette, I mean, I guess we could throw Vlad out there too. He's played some third base this year, but Bichette probably more likely to get traded and also quite a bit cheaper, I would imagine, in trade. But there's just not a lot of third base options out there. So I don't know if you guys have any ideas for third base, real ones, right? Not trade for Rafael Devers,
right?
Not, trade for Fernando Tatis Jr. and put him at third base. None of that garbage. If you
Trade for Ohtani, play him at third base.
Yeah. If you have any real ideas, let us know in the comments. But third base is going to be the position that it's connected to second base, because it feels like Cole Young probably going to end up playing one of those positions for most of next year.
Yep.
And ideally it would be second base. But that extra infielder,
maybe it's Cole Young at third and you trade for Brandon Lau.
Sure. Or maybe Brandon Lau is a third baseman.
Yeah. But that's how you make up for the lack of power. Is you get someone like Lau who has shown the ability to hit for 30 bombs in a season from second base.
Right. Third base is going to be the most important and most difficult position for the Mariners to fill this winter. One thing they absolutely cannot do is they cannot just roll it back with Josh Rojas and Dylan Moore as a platoon there. Doesn't work. Not going to work.
It does not. That's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tidy Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tidy Gonzalez, Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next time. Peace.